Good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 1 of the BHE podcast. I can't think of a better way to start off with a bang than what we're about to talk about today. So, today we're about to talk about life, the existence of life, if it's out there in the universe, what it means in terms of life. Because honestly, that kind of stuff intrigues me to the point where I know I'll never understand because I'm not a physicist. I'm not a scientist. I'm nobody who's smart enough to understand the complexity of the universe. But I am, in fact, curious to the point where I would love to know. So that's coffee. Sorry. So I was going through just, you know, my Google, basically just Google, honestly, and the first British astronaut has come out and he has said that life life can exist among us that we would not perceive. And that alone made me go, really? Here on Earth, really? And it's absolutely true. So he describes the acronym, it's like Miss Green without an E, MRSGREN. He said that's an easy acronym for life, if you want to think of it this way, which is it stands for movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, and nutrition. Okay, that's an easy acronym for life. You can determine life. So this guy's he's not only the first astronaut, he's also a chemist at Imperial College London, um, and he's a genius. He's smart. Okay, so this is a quote from him. I want to make sure that I get this completely right because the details on this are very, very important. So he says, while life may be easy to recognize, it's actually notoriously difficult to define, and has had scientists and philosophers in debate for centuries, if not millennia. For example, a 3D printer can reproduce itself, but we wouldn't call it alive. On the other hand, a mule is famously sterile, but we would never say it doesn't live. So it's easy for us to base life off of what we see as life, which is like us, like animals, things like that we could perceive as life. But what if it's different than us? Is essentially the question. What if it's not made the way we are? What if it's completely different? Could it still exist here? Could it exist somewhere else? Could we see it? Could we even find it if it was out there? And so if it's a different genetic makeup, for example, he was saying, like we're made of carbon and nitrogen, right? Could it be made of something else? Could it be created differently? Could it be unsealed to the human eye by the way that these chemicals formed and bonded to each other? That's a great question. So he says that if it did exist, if something like that did exist that wasn't like us, it would be in something called the Shadow Biosphere, which, yeah, it sounds pretty far-fetched, pretty foreign, but that's not like a ghost realm or an undiscovered, you know, spiritual plane. Okay, it's just a spot where it's not spiritual, it's not like us physically, but it's somewhere in the middle. If that makes sense. And so again, that means we can't study it because we have nothing to pick up that. It means that since they're made differently, their biochemistry is different, we're probably not going to be able to see them. So unless we can think literally outside the box on the idea of life, we would never ever be able to find them, which I find extremely. And again, it's a theory. We can't prove it or disprove it. I know that's kind of out there and blah, but this ties together something that I never thought it would tie together in the history of the world. Okay, the universe even. So let's see. So if we can't see them, they're made differently than us, and we can't perceive them with current technology. Assuming it exists, obviously, it would be microscopic. So this unknown location would be so small that it would be impossible to detect. And the first thing that my brain said, because I'm a huge Marvel geek, Marvel's my life. I have an Captain America tattoo on my calf. is the idea of the microverse, which is the people in the quantum realm. If you watch the Avengers Endgame movie, it's the race of people hidden microscopically, living in a place where time and space doesn't follow the laws of time and space that we know it as. My brain exploded. You're telling me that people can actually think that this is real, that it could be a real thing. They are called the microverse, and the people, which are called the micronauts, okay, could actually be a real possibility. And they could be living amongst us microscopically, and we would have no idea. My jaw dropped to the floor, okay? Because now, as you're not going to hear those two words come out from Marvel, they're not going to be able to use those. Copyright, they don't have that access to those words. They don't have the rights to do so. So they're going to have to call it something different. But that in the comic book sense of Marvel, that's exactly what they're called. Those are the names. And now, since we have a limited way of studying this microscopic world, if it even is out there or if it exists, we can only even test things on a tiny, tiny scale. We can only, so his name, I forgot to mention his name, by the way. So Helen Sharman is his name, okay? The first astronaut and the physicist, all right? Now, he says we can only produce a small percentage of microbes that we can culture in a lab to test, okay? Which means, which is where this theory came from, that there could be a million different possibilities for this microverse mini version of life. We just would have no idea. Our technology is not there. So, again, the way we think about life is based on how we are, and a huge role in our existence is the idea of DNA. If it's built differently than us, would it even have DNA? Could it be differently formed? And I started thinking, well, doesn't every living organism have DNA? Doesn't it have a certain that we know of? So if you think outside the box, if you think broader than just us on planet Earth, okay, there's silicone-based life forms. It's very rare. We've been able to create living silicone life in a lab, very small, microscopic, in the essence living, not living like a being like me or you, but essentially it is alive, right? We've been able to culture that up in the lab. But that's like 90% of Earth. Earth is made up of a ton of different elements, including silicon. I think 90% is what it said. And if there was a being that could attach itself to silicon instead of carbon like we are, then it could be a whole different biochemistry, but still actually be living on Earth. It could be a whole nother, we could be accessing a different plane than they could be accessing a different plane on the same planet that we live on. What? Now, so I was looking this up too. So silicone life, it would be very, very different in the sense of how it's structurally created and its biochemistry. But it's the best shot because it's similar to carbon, right? So it can be used to build and create just as carbon would be, and to form different bonds, okay? So carbon can create strong double and triple bonds to form long chains for multiple functions such as like cell walls for us, okay? But that's much harder when you take it from a when you look at it from a base of silicone. So silicone struggles to make and form bonds that are strong, that hold just like carbon would. So the long chain molecules are much less stable. For example, some are even water soluble. So that's not very good since 70% of Earth is ocean, right? But it's so carbon dioxide is highly soluble, okay? But the carbon is more flexible and provides many more molecular possibilities, which is why carbon is such an important component to our existence. Now, a few years ago, some scientists at Caltech managed to breed a bacterial protein that I was talking about, created bonds with that silicone, which, like I said, essentially means they brought silicone to life. It was a living organism. Okay, so even though it's inflexible, compared to carbon, perhaps it can find a way. Nature's adaptable. Maybe it could assemble into its own living organism in ways that we never thought or could perceive itself. Things could be working in the background we would never even thought about because we can only see life from our perspective, from the eyes of who we are and how we see life. Now that also doesn't limit another possibility, which we'll get into after this. I just want to make sure we get all this evidence down, because in order to find this kind of life, in order to even perceive it, for example, it has to be outside our biological box, the way we see life biologically. It'd have to be so far out there that we'd have to just completely throw out the belief of what we think life could be like. And that got me thinking, this is just one possibility that we could think on Earth. Most of the universe isn't made up this way. So essentially, it brings up the idea of aliens. So a lot of people are talking about aliens, which is a huge thing. So if they exist, if they don't, I would say it's a very small chance we're the only ones on Earth and in the universe. Okay? Very small. Just from a math perspective, from a regular old Joe who's intrigued with all this, it's very, very small that we'd be the only thing in the universe. Now, would we even be able to perceive them? That's what I don't think we would. Honestly, I don't think it's going to be like Jodie Foster in Contact. I don't think it's going to be like, all these alien movies where we can actually physically see. That's if they're created like us. What if they're not? What if it's somewhere else? What if they're biologically different, which is highly likely, considering that the universe is absolutely different, that each planet is different. They were even saying, for example, the moon on Jupiter, Titan. They were saying, is it Jupiter? Saturn, maybe? I don't know. One of the moons in our universe, I think it's called Titan. I think it's Jupiter, I'm pretty sure. They were saying that even that would be the strongest chance in our solar system to contain silicone-based life, based on its atmosphere and the chemical makeup. So you could essentially have a moon or a planet or whatever in our universe, in our solar system, within our fathomable reach, okay, that would essentially be full of life, different life that we would never perceive because we were locked in our human lens to see through it. Now, another thing that also brings into fact is not only a different biochemistry, a different makeup of these beings, but dimensionally would be different. So, for example, we've been flirting with the idea of the fourth dimension since 1905, when Einstein came up with the theory of relativity. So, we can perceive things as a 3D world because we're 3D beings. Take it or leave it, that's how God made us, that's how we're going to be, okay? We are three-dimensional. We see in length, depth, and width. That's all we can perceive, that's all we can fathom. And the only way we can see even three-dimensionally is based on light, the idea of the shadow of light. So from the sun. So even that, just thinking about that makes it seem so basic, even though life is so complex. So for example, we'll go into detail on the dimensions. One dimension, imagine like a dot. Okay? That's one dimension. You can go one way, that's it. This way, left and right. Two-dimensional. Okay? It's like a shape, like a triangle, circle, square. Go up, down, left and right. That's two-dimensional. Okay? 3D, think of like a cube, a sphere, a cone. Three-dimensional objects. Okay? They have depth to them. Okay? So that's the third dimension, is the depth. We have access to that as humans. Now, when you think about that, then you kind of go, okay, well, what would the fourth dimension look like? And essentially, it's called a tesseract. Okay, so in order to look, I had to look that up because I was not for sure exactly, because tesseract, where I'm from, in the Marvel universe, is the big blue square that controls space. Okay, You see where I'm getting at? These dots are connecting, and yeah, it's blowing my mind just thinking about it. Now, so because, like I discussed, we're three-dimensional, it's hard for us to make a shape or the idea of a fourth-dimensional view from a three-dimensional being looking at it, for example, on a computer, which is a two-dimensional object. So, like I said before, take it or leave it, we're three-dimensional and we're stuck there. So even if there was a fourth dimension, the shape that we're going to look at will look three-dimensional. So it's not like we're going to see anything different, and it's on a two-dimensional screen. So we wouldn't even be able to perceive a fourth dimension if it even existed. Now, so, oh my gosh, that's beyond crazy. So, now, well, then you guys have the question, how do you even perceive the fourth dimension? How do you even study it? How do you even know that it exists? Well, the same way we can do the same way that we do it with regular objects, okay? So, for example, 3D objects can cast a 2D shadow, okay? So we can study that 2D shadow from a 3D object because of how light hits it. So we can study that. So the same goes for a 4D object. So hypothetically, if the 4D object had a shadow, it could cast a shadow. It does. That's how we can study that. So we're not going to be able to study the actual fourth dimensional object or fourth dimension. We would just be able to study it, but never understand it. It'd be like reaching and being so close to touch it, but you can never ever touch it. That's going to be us with the fourth dimension forever, because we're three-dimensional beings. That's how it's going to go. It's how it's always going to be. No getting around that, right? Now, having said that, when I started doing all this research about these different, for the fourth dimension, a different chemical makeup, and for example, the planet Titan, the three words stuck out. Okay, Titan, Tesseract, Microscopic. Okay, Tesseract, like I just discussed, is the cube that controls space in the Marvel Universe. Okay, space. Titan is the planet where Thanos is from that they go and fight on in comic book canon, right? The microverse and the micronauts, a microscopic universe with people that are so microscopic you can never perceive, is a real thing in comic book canon. So are you telling me at this moment right now, in 2020, January 12th, 2020, are you telling me right now that the Marvel Universe is based on actual fact and Stan Lee is a hidden genius? Is that what you're telling me? Because that's what it sounds like to me. Those seems like way too much of a coincidence. Because, and now this is me, this fourth dimension stuff, I didn't know about this until like a year or two ago. And it was perceived in like 2012, 2013 to be complete malarkey, like not even a real thing. And now that we have evidence of a fourth dimension in 2020, now people are completely wrong. How in the heck would Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who also wrote a lot of Marvel Universe, but Stan Lee alone, be able to take all of that information and make a universe out of it that we are watching in the theaters? I mean, that's ingenuity, that's creativity, that's on a whole nother level. That's genius. And he's passed away now, but if I had the chance to meet him and tell him this information, oh my gosh. I mean, even if it was just, which is highly unlikely, that it was even a hiccup, even if it was just a hiccup, that he happened to just name these things, I'm guarantee you it's not. They didn't even know what it would be called. Just the Tesseract. The way it looks and everything. Maybe it was different. I don't know. I have not seen the 1970s comics. Okay? I'm just into what is the now. Okay? But even in 2012, 2013, when the fourth dimension was supposed to be malarkey, they still had the Tesseract in the movie, The Avengers. Right? So, it's insane. Now, if you're telling me right now, if in the future, that we are able to find a microverse with micronauts, with little people who live here, right here somewhere, microscopically, that don't follow the laws of time and space, just like in the movie in Quantum Realm. So would Marvel be fact at that point? Would it be like, would it just be like, oh, Stan Lee, that was a great story. Turns out it's real. It's a real thing. That's a real thing. But anyway, just all of that completely baffles me because not only would we not be able to find it because of our three-dimensional idea of the universe, say they were in a fourth dimension, but also we would never be able to find them because of the inability to detect them based on our perception of life and our biochemistry and how we make up life. So that opens up an entire realm of possibility that that no one's ever really thought of. So people can always be like, aliens can come down, they come here, they visit us. That's probably highly unlikely. What I believe, and this is just me spitballing my opinion, right? That's what this podcast is. It's opinion. I do the research, I make an opinion, we listen, and we have a good time. Boom. Podcast right there. Now, if I can make an assumption, I would have to assume that the universe is going to be completely empty to us for a long, 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 long time. I don't believe that we're going to be able to just go up there, detect life, find life. I feel like life is going to be made up this way, whether it's either just beyond our reach, where we'll never be able to see it, never be able to find it. Not that we're not curious, not that we don't want to reach out in any way possible, but the idea that we never will get there, right? That's what I'm more concerned, not concerned about, but trying to emphasize that even if humans advance and we can do everything we thought was impossible when it comes to the universe and searching for life, the odds of us even getting close is about it's like 0%. Like the idea that it's just based on the way we're made up and the way that we can perceive life. I don't think we're ever going to be able to find physical proof of life. But the idea that the impossible perception of life is tied into my favorite movie franchise, and that Stan Lee was able to craft this giant Marvel universe based on just what little information he had in the 70s, it blew my mind. I would have never guessed in a million years, ever, that was a real thing, and that was a real idea. Again, I kind of wish he wasn't passed away, and I would have had a chance to meet him, and just say those three words, like, Titan is where Thanos is from. They say the Titan in our solar system could hold life. The silicone-based life, which could also be microscopic, just like your Micronauts, your microverse. And the Tesseract in the Avengers movies that you've made is actually the description, the shape, the look of what we would assume the fourth dimension looks like, which is another dimensional space that you, in your comic books and movies, expand into a greater universe bigger than ourselves. Is that amazing? And I don't know how Stanley sounds, but I assume it'd be something like, whoa, my. It's either going to be like, I had no idea, it was just a guess. or yes, I did plenty of research on it, and this was all barely in there in the news. We had to go and research it from the newspaper, from the magazines, from the, like, man, either way, it's a good answer. You're a creative genius, or you're an actual universal. You're just universal being at this point, Stanley. You're just going to be alive forever. That's you, in spirit, in memory, all of that. Now, again, this is just to my limited knowledge. I don't think we'll ever be able to achieve what we think we will. I feel like that's just human nature. We set ourselves, we set our goals way up here, and we create, we make, we build until we get there. We fight for it. We're good at that, right? We're good at doing that. But I think on this one, I think it's just time to throw in the towel. You know what I mean? Not necessarily to give up in the sense of throwing in the towel. I'm just saying that I think maybe instead of looking at it from a perspective of through human eyes, we start to think bigger than ourselves. We start to look more towards, towards rather than developing and trying to reach out in space. I feel like I'd rather see more progress made here at home for us as human beings. I'd rather see a lot of people, um, reach deeper inside themselves than reach out to space and this kind of make believe. But I mean, it's hard. You can't help it. You know. Now I'm hooked. Now I'm gonna keep going. And a lot of this stuff, I know I pulled a lot of information and put it out there for you guys, but um, I have all the links. I have on YouTube. I'll put it on the video here. That way I'm not stealing information. I'm not taking anything from anybody. But I read I read for like an hour and a half on all of this stuff and pulled the vital pieces I wanted to mention and put out to you guys. And hopefully keep you updated on on the fact of the Marvel universe and our universe, if this coexistence is even possible. Now that would be something to look into. The idea of finding this microscopic life, living with it. I mean, imagine a whole different civilization microscopically that you would never ever perceive, but is 20,000 times more advanced than you, especially if they have more access to space and time that you would never perceive or be able to perceive. Maybe at that point, maybe you could experience the fourth dimension. Maybe instead of us perceiving it, we would have these micronauts. I mean, you could go in all detail who would be able to perceive and give us all this information. It's literally mind blowing. It's insane. I have no other words for it, to be honest. But again, I'm going to take the links. I'll put them in the description. I'll make sure everybody gets mentioned. And hopefully find more detail on some more of this stuff. But in the meantime, hold on to that. So the universe just got a whole lot bigger and a whole lot more complicated. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're on the podcast here, we'll be putting these out a lot more. I'm excited for this. I'm excited for you guys to hear this information. I live for this. I love this. And we will see you soon. I'll catch you later on the next episode. Bye, guys.